Hey, this is Carmen Rodriguez from El Cafecito del Día. At LACLA, we are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speaks. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Unions rally against the Trump administration. New Hampshire rejects right to work again. And King Soopers keeps UFCW Local 7's lawyers very busy. I'm Harold Phillips, and this is Labor Week for February 14th, 2025. Powered by the Labor Radio Podcast Network.
Come on, you toilers that work for wages. Come from every land, trying to fight and band. In one union, ran them for the workers. We'll make up on this earth a paradise when their slaves get wise and organized.
Welcome to another episode of Labor Week, featuring a roundup of the top worker and organized labor news from the past week. You'll find links to the articles I mention at laborweek.org. Just look up this episode in the episode section. Unions continued to push back against the Trump administration's attacks on federal workers this week. Tuesday saw hundreds of federal workers and their supporters flock to Upper Senate Park in Washington, D.C. in a rally to save the civil service. As Olivia George writes in The Washington Post, the rally drew Democratic lawmakers, union leaders, and federal employees from across the Washington region and beyond, with some flying in and bundled up amid the frigid February temperatures. Unions aren't just rallying to protect working people, they're also continuing to bring lawsuits against Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. I'm never going to stop finding that name ridiculous. And the Trump administration. On Monday, the American Federation of Teachers, the National Active and Retired Federal Employees Association, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, and the National Federation of Federal Employees filed a suit in Maryland federal court alleging that the Treasury Department had disclosed the contents of government systems that include records on Americans' tax refunds and Social Security benefits. As Juan Perez Jr. writes in Politico, the labor groups further accuse the Department of Education of improperly disclosing information in its national student loan data system that carries sensitive financial records for nearly 43 million borrowers. And they accuse the Office of Personnel Management of allowing Musk's representatives to access the information on millions of current and former federal employees, plus federal job applicants. On Tuesday, the AFL-CIO and a coalition of unions amended their lawsuit to keep DOGE from accessing Department of Labor systems to include systems at the Department of Health and Human Services and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In a statement announcing the amended lawsuit, AFL-CIO President Liz Shuler said, quote, Elon Musk and DOGE continue to jeopardize Americans' most sensitive personal data and threaten our health, safety, rights, paychecks, and essential services we depend on. Unions and allies will vigorously fight DOGE's attempt to put working people at risk through reckless actions that endanger workers and our families. They must be stopped. End quote. You know, folks, you get a lot of things when you join a union. More respect on the job, better wages, better benefits. But one of those benefits a lot of people don't think about? Lawyers. When you join a union, you often have access to the union's lawyers, and they'll fight for you during contract negotiations and, really importantly these days, in a courtroom. Unfortunately, one union lawsuit against the Trump administration was rejected this week. As Andreas Hugh reports on NPR, U.S. District Judge George O'Toole declined to block the Trump administration's deferred resignation program on Wednesday, writing that the plaintiffs, labor unions representing more than 800,000 civil servants, lack standing to challenge Trump's fork-in-the-road directive because they are not directly impacted by it. In a statement, American Federation of Government Employees, or AFGE, President Everett Kelly called the decision a setback, but not the end of the fight. It's worth noting that O'Toole didn't rule on the legality of the deferred resignation program, just the suit AFGE and the other unions filed to block it. With that hurdle cleared, though, the Trump administration closed the Fork program on Wednesday and began laying off federal employees. NPR reports that while the full scale of layoffs isn't clear, the first round of cuts appear to target employees who were recently hired and are still on probationary status. By Thursday evening, the firings were affecting a wide swath of federal workers, including employees responsible for education, small business grants, and the nation's nuclear weapons stockpile. Yeah, let's reduce the number of people we have watching over our nuclear weapons. What could possibly go wrong, right? In response to the firings, AFGE President Everett Kelly said in a statement, quote, "This administration has abused the probationary period to conduct a politically driven mass firing spree, targeting employees not because of performance, but because they were hired before Trump took office. These firings are not about poor performance. There is no evidence these employees were anything but dedicated public servants. They are about power. They are about gutting the federal government, silencing workers, and forcing agencies into submission to a radical agenda that prioritizes cronyism over competence." End quote. The statement closed with Kelly saying, quote, "AFGE will fight these firings every step of the way. We will stand with every impacted employee, pursue every legal challenge available, and hold this administration accountable for its reckless actions. Federal employees are not disposable, and we will not allow the government to treat them as such." End quote. While things are, well, pretty awful at the federal level, workers in New Hampshire got some good news when their state House of Representatives voted to indefinitely postpone House Bill 238, which would have turned New Hampshire into a right-to-work state and prohibited collective bargaining agreements from requiring employees to join or contribute to a union. William Skipworth reports in the New Hampshire Bulletin that this rejection is the latest in a long series stretching back to the 1980s of failed attempts by Republicans to make New Hampshire the Northeast's only right-to-work state. But it should be noted that Thursday's vote saw several Republicans cross the aisle to block the legislation. Yeah, it sounds like such a good thing. Right, folks? Right to work? Everybody should have the right to work. And everybody does. There's a reason that unions tend to call right to work right to freeload, though. What right to work really means is that when people get hired in a workplace with a union, they don't have to join the union, but they still get the benefits of the contract the union has negotiated. And the union still has to represent all the workers in that workplace. They can't pick and choose who they represent or who they don't. You remember those union lawyers I mentioned a little while ago? How do you think they get paid? They're paid out of union members' dues. And if there are more non-dues paying employees in a workplace than there are dues paying employees, well, the union's going to have a hard time hiring those lawyers to fight the employer when they violate their workers' rights, or certain government officials that may be going after working people. Right to work is a slick marketing term for starving unions of resources, and eventually weakening them to the point they can't defend working people like you and me at all. And working people like the 10,000 King Soopers workers who have been on strike across Colorado since February 6th. Those union lawyers have been busy since the strikes began, fending off lawsuits from the Kroger-owned grocery chain, including one in which King Soopers alleges the Workers' Union, United Food and Commercial Workers, or UFCW Local 7, is prioritizing out-of-state special interests by forcing the company to bargain with labor unions from Washington and California. Colorado Public Radio reports the lawsuit claims the union violated the National Labor Relations Act by forcing King Soopers to include employees from outside UFCW Local 7. As evidence, the lawsuit outlines and quotes statements and messages where the unions appear to discuss joining forces to put pressure on the grocery chain. One such statement reads, quote, "Together, united, UFCW 3000, UFCW Local 7, and Teamsters Local 38 will coordinate proposals and actions to show Kroger and Albertsons that again in 2025, when we stand together, we win." Unquote. In response, UFCW Local 7 called King Soopers' lawsuit frivolous. President Kim Cordova said in a statement, quote, "It is particularly galling that King Soopers is making such false allegations given the company's own track record of being caught lying about illegal coordination agreements with its competitor, Safeway Albertsons, during the 2022 ULP strike by UFCW Local 7 workers." Unquote. So, let me see if I got this right. King Soopers is owned by Kroger, a corporation that operates in multiple states. It's fine for them to collaborate with out-of-state interests to run stores like Ralph's in the Southeast or Fred Meyer here in the Pacific Northwest and Food for Less in the Midwest. But it's not okay for the unions who represent the workers in all those locations to collaborate so they make sure those workers are treated fairly across Kroger's network of stores? Have I got that right? Because that doesn't sound right. Now let's take a look at some of the stories we're going to want to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. Amazon employees at the RDU-1 warehouse outside Raleigh, North Carolina, are voting as I record this on whether they want to unionize with the independent union Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, or CAUSE. The vote is scheduled to run through Saturday, February 15th. Tomorrow. As Brian Gordon puts it in the Charlotte Observer, the campaign conducted outside and within the Wake County warehouse has involved music, hamburgers, informational sessions, banners, and charges of unfair labor practices. At stake is whether RDU-1 employees unionize, and the labor movement notches a monumental victory in the nation's least unionized state. We should know the result of the union vote tomorrow. As usual, it's happening after I record this, so check in with my Labor Radio Podcast Network colleagues at Work Stoppage when their show drops on Tuesday for their take on the results. A major union at the University of California has announced it will go on a 2-day strike later this month. The Bruin reports that the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, or AFSCME, Local 3299, which represents service, patient care, and skilled craft workers, called on its 37,000 workers to strike February 26th and February 27th across all 10 university campuses. The union alleges the university has negotiated in bad faith on a new contract and that the university used intimidation, including threats of disciplinary action following new speech rules and of arrest for protesting, to prevent the workers from striking. Well, that intimidation sure worked out well for you, didn't it, UC? Maybe try just working with your employees and their union next time? We'll see what happens on February 26th. And looking way far ahead, teachers in California's public school systems are planning to align their contract bargaining this year. Capital and Maine reports that the California Teachers Association has announced roughly 77,000 educators in 32 districts, about a quarter of the union's full membership, will bargain for contracts this year around a shared set of core issues: improved wages, smaller class sizes, fully staffed schools, and more resources for students. The union can't usually negotiate for such improvements on a large-scale basis. The locals in the individual districts have to do that for themselves. But through a carefully orchestrated series of moves over the past several years, many of the state's largest districts have aligned their contracts to expire on the same day, June 30th. So, parents in California, start talking to your school superintendents now. Tell them to start sitting down and bargaining with their teachers' locals before June 30th. Because I don't think you want to see a mass teachers' strike on June 30th, do you? Before we go, let's take a look at some of the events in labor history that occurred in the past week. On February 9th, 2000, over 23,000 engineering and technical employees of the Boeing Company went on strike in 7 states. February 12th marked the beginning of the Memphis sanitation strike in 1968. And love him or hate him, Teamsters President Jimmy Hoffa was born on February 14th, 1913. And that's Labor Week for February 14th, 2025. Was there a story missing from my top labor news roundup? Let me know at news@laborweek.org. Follow Labor Week on Blue Sky, Facebook, and Twitter @Labor Week for the latest updates throughout the week. As always, you'll find links to the articles mentioned in this edition of Labor Week at laborweek.org. Just look up the episodes in the episode list. Labor Week is produced and edited by me, Harold Phillips, under a SAG-AFTRA Micropod Agreement. We're a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Find more labor radio shows and podcasts, and more about the network, at laborradionetwork.org. And our music is from Batitudes, Joe Hill Punk Exposure. Find out more about Batitudes at facebook.com/Batitudes. Check the link in our show notes. And remember what Jimmy Hoffa said. Don't let any man in your cab, your home, or your heart, unless he's a friend of labor. Keep standing up and keep standing together, brothers, sisters, and siblings. I'll see you soon.